Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we got a huge 12-game college basketball slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It helps the channel a lot. So in these 12 games, 10 of the games, the home team is favored, and that really does play a lot into how we're going to look at this slate. Obviously, there are going to be players that are going to be viable on the away teams, but you definitely want to prioritize those home teams. This season has been pretty crazy when it comes to home teams domination, so especially on this slate, it looks like that's definitely going to be in play. The only two games that have the away team winning is Tennessee versus Missouri, and Tennessee's an 11-point favorite there. And I believe it is the UConn versus Creighton game where UConn's favored by 2.5 points. I could see that game going either way, but UConn has been dominating lately. So let's go and get into the slate. I do have one core play here for you, and that's Anderson Garcia for Texas A&M. He's just too cheap for his potential today. I do like his upside in this matchup, and he's played very well as of late. So I will get into him more as I go through this slate. I'm going to go top to bottom price wise um, from that perspective. So let's go ahead and get started here. My first guy I'm going to talk about is Jameer Young for Maryland. Now he's got a matchup here against Wisconsin. He is on the road team, but he's definitely a favorable option today. Um, I think he's got about the highest ceiling of almost any player on the slate, which gives him a lot of opportunity. Not only that, but he's got a pretty good floor as well. He's played pretty solid. He does need about 34 fantasy points today, and this matchup definitely gives him some utility to do that. He hasn't faced Wisconsin this season, so do keep that in mind. Dalton Connect for Tennessee has been playing extremely well. His team is the only team that is favored by over 10 points on the road, and he has just been consistent throughout the season, within a couple exceptions against like Kentucky and uh, Vanderbilt, where he only scored 26 fantasy points in those two games. I think he's going to get closer to his, his average of 32, 33, which is what he needs about to pay off here at $8,700. He's just played very well throughout the season, and he's definitely a great option on the slate. I don't have a lot from Tennessee to like today, really, but he is definitely the one guy to consider on this matchup. Looking at Trey Alexander for Creighton, he is fairly expensive here, and they do have a tough matchup against UConn, but I do think that if you think Creighton's going to win this game, which is a pretty tight game from the Vegas at just 2.5 points, then there's actually three guys from Creighton to consider, and Trey Alexander is definitely one of them. Uh, that's definitely a stackable possibility today. He has also been absolutely phenomenal lately. Ever since they played UConn last time, he's been over a 5x at this price point in every single game. Obviously, it's going to carry some risk with the uh, tough matchup, but he's definitely a viable, favorable option here. Same goes for Cockburner for Creighton. He actually was very good against UConn the first time they played with 33 fantasy points, and he's absolutely been just as good throughout the season up until this point. So he's a great option on the slate as well. I was very close to making him a core play, but the matchup here is really the issue that keeps him from being one. But if you like Creighton in this game, then they definitely have a couple guys that are worth taking a look at. Then we're going to look at DJ Horn for NC State. Now, Horn is pretty expensive today. He does have a lower floor than the other guys I've already mentioned so far, but he definitely has a pretty good ceiling at about 40 fantasy points. He does need about 32, 33 to pay off here, and that's a little bit above what he does typically do. But this home game against Syracuse, he's been pretty solid in the first time he played against them, though he didn't get quite what he needed. I do suspect that he's going to have opportunity to get over 30 fantasy points in this one. He does carry a bit of a GPP play though. Jaden Ledee for San Diego State definitely looks like a similar option to Horn. He's also on the road though, but he's been just as good against Utah State in their first game. He will need to have a game like that again. Hopefully, he can pull a double double. I think he's a little bit safer than Horn, but he's definitely a solid option on the slate. Looking at Wade Taylor for Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M should dominate this game from start to finish. He's been a little bit inconsistent lately, but he definitely had a gigantic game against Arkansas the first time they played. And so he has a high ceiling, obviously. He's one of the higher ceilings on the slate in general, and so he's definitely a viable option here if you can afford him at $8,200. He does need about 32 fantasy points, which is above which is actually below what his season averages are right now. Then we're going to look at Reese for UMD Maryland here. Now Reese has been pretty consistent, and he's not quite as he's a little bit safer than Wade Taylor. The thing is, that he's got a lower floor. Sorry, he has a higher floor but a lower ceiling here. He hasn't faced Wisconsin yet this season, but he has some utility in the slate. He does have a couple of floor games, but he's about the same price and has some nice upside on the slate. Then we got a couple guys in the 7,000 range. Tony Perkins being one for Iowa. Now, this is definitely a risky matchup here against Michigan State. And he has been a little bit inconsistent lately. He's a little bit overpriced here, but he definitely has some good ceiling opportunities. And this is definitely a game where he should be able to play pretty well despite the fact that it's a tougher matchup. Watkins for Florida State is somebody I really like today. He's very similar to Perkins, though he has a higher ceiling and a little bit of a lower floor, but not by much. And while he's definitely a GPP play only, he definitely has some good potential in this game, as this should be a decent matchup for him. Looking at Rajay Davis sorry, Dennis here. Sorry, I don't know why I said Davis. Dennis here. Um, Now for Baylor, now he had a really low game against BYU the first time, so he definitely carries a lot of risk. If you want to stack Baylor, this is definitely a possible way to go today because they could have a big game here, but they definitely carry some risk being on the road for them, and BYU's been pretty solid lately, and so I do think he's going to be a risky matchup, but he definitely has a high ceiling, and he's definitely worth a look because he does have that 40 fantasy point upside. Cam Spencer is a guy for UConn that if you really think UConn can keep it up, then this is probably my favorite play from Connecticut. He's also not too expensive at $7,700. He's got a pretty high floor and a really good ceiling, so he's definitely worth a look on the slate, though it is a tough matchup, so do keep that in mind. Tyson Walker for Michigan State has been really solid throughout the season. His floor and ceiling are a bit lower than I'd like for his price today, but he definitely draws a good matchup here against Iowa, and I like for him to have a solid game, especially at home where he's played better throughout the year. Tyrese Radford at $7,000 also is in play here. Now, he has a pretty good floor, but his ceiling is also higher than Tyson Walker's is. The question is if he can keep the floor, too much lower than Walker or not. That floor definitely takes the risk here because the matchup is good, but he didn't even do that much against the first time as he didn't shoot the ball well against Arkansas. I do look for him to play well, though, in this game as he's been playing pretty good lately. But that floor is a concern. Sean East is at the same price for Missouri. Now, he definitely carries a very tough matchup here, and I don't expect Missouri to do very much here. But East does have a high ceiling, even though he has a super low floor. He's squarely a GPP play, and if you think Missouri can be sneaky as a home team, then him and Bates are definitely options that I would put in for a GPP lineup with a Missouri stack, as they are the two guys on the team that seem to have the most consistency and have high ceilings. But that Bates's floor is not good at all. I mean, neither one of their floors are very good for this matchup. AJ Hoggard for Michigan State here uh, becomes a decent value play here. Now he has a low floor, but he has a nice ceiling. He's one of the higher ceilings when it comes to the under 7,000 range, and he's definitely a pretty solid slot on this slate. But he definitely carries some risk. Trayvon Mark for Arkansas. If this game was at home, I would definitely like him a lot more as he dominated Texas A&M the last time they played. However, he is priced pretty fairly today. He has a pretty safe ceiling, sorry, a pretty safe floor and a decent ceiling here, so he's definitely worth a look, and he's somebody I do like as a decent option on the slate. Posh Alexander is a guy I really wanted to make a core play, but again, being on the road has really hurt some teams this season. But he's been solid the last few games with the exception of one, and he had a really big game against Villanova the last time they played. I look for him to be a pretty decent option here with a decent ceiling and a safe floor. Same goes for Jacoby Walter for Baylor. Now, he definitely carries some risk as being on the road, but he had about 20 fantasy points against BYU the last time they played, and that is about his floor here. He definitely has a 30 plus point ceiling, and that's what we definitely want him to do today if they're going to keep this game close. Looking at Stephen Ashworth for Creighton, again, another guy for Creighton. If you think they can hang with UConn at home, which it looks like it's going to be a pretty tight game, then he's definitely somebody I consider, though he did have a low floor game against UConn. That is his floor, as he's been well above his floor the last about 10 games, so he's definitely a good solid option on the slate. if you think Creighton can keep it close. Looking at Anderson Garcia, um, he's the guy I do think is a core play for me, and he has been pretty solid lately. His minutes have been a little bit funky, but I do like his potential here, and he's definitely going to draw a favorable matchup here against Arkansas. Looking at TJ Bamba, looking into the value plays now, Bamba has been pretty solid for Villanova despite this tough matchup here. Um, I do think that he does carry a little bit of risk, but that his last game against Nova was or against Butler was pretty much their floor game. With being this game being at home, he's been considerably better at home, and I think he has a pretty good ceiling for this game, though he definitely carries some risk as he hasn't been particularly consistent throughout the season. Pop Isaacs is a guy I really like today. I really wanted to make him a core play as well. He's very close. He absolutely dominated TCU the last time they played, and he's got a pretty good ceiling for this game, and he has a high floor. So even though he's had a couple off games recently, he definitely has some solid opportunity to have a good game. Um, I also do like Jalen Bridges, pretty good today for Baylor. Oops, where is he? For Baylor. Now, he definitely carries some risk as this could be a pretty defensive matchup, but he dominated BYU last time they played. However, this game is on the road, though that hasn't really affected him too much, even though his shooting percentage on the road is a little bit lower. I still expect him to have a solid game and definitely be a viable option on the slate. Looking at JJ Starling, for Hughes. He has played inconsistent throughout the season. He's got a higher floor than I expected today, but he also has a low ceiling, so he's kind of a safety squeeze type play. But he is on the road, which is a concern, and he's been actually scoring more points on the away games, though they had less of them. I do think he's a viable option as he's played pretty consistent lately, um, even though he does have that lower floor. Looking at BYU, we have two guys here for them, and Dallin Hall. If you think that BYU is going to win this game, then I would definitely roll with him, as he's played very well lately, and he's a little bit underpriced actually for this matchup. He has a high floor as well, sorry, a high ceiling as well at around 30 fantasy points, which is the highest for the sub $6,000 players. Looking at Spencer Johnson for BYU, he's also played well lately, even though he didn't have a great game against Baylor where he just scored 21 fantasy points. That's pretty close to what he needs, so I think he's got a high enough ceiling that he's worth a look here, though he definitely carries more risk than Hall does, as Hall's a little bit safer. Marcel for NC State is a guy that has been pretty good throughout the season. He had a good game against Syracuse last time. I expect him to have a similar type of game. Now this game is at home. He should have a nice ceiling as well. The floor is a little bit of a concern as he's had some floor games lately, but he definitely has a high ceiling. He's definitely worth a look here. Jace Carter, also in play for Texas A&M. He's been inconsistent throughout the season, but he's been playing better lately, and I expect him to get a few over 30 minutes in this game as he's been playing that the last few. He also has a low floor and a high ceiling, so he's definitely risky. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but he's definitely a viable option here. Chase McMillan for Texas Tech is one of the cheaper options available on the slate. Now, he had a really good game against TCU the first time they played, and I expect him to have another opportunity to have a good game like that. He has a high ceiling, but he definitely has 16 fantasy point floor, so he's definitely an interesting play on the slate. And then finally, last but not least, Darren Green for Florida State. Now, he definitely carries a little bit of risk here, being one of the cheapest guys available that has some upside. He doesn't have a high ceiling, but that 20 to 24 range is about where I expect him to get, and that can definitely be a kind of good value play for this slate. With that said, guys, it's definitely a high risk slate, but there's some guys you can utilize. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Let me know in the comments what your favorite plays are, and have a nice day, guys.